Any successful businessman, whether Carnegie with his mountain of steel or Rockefeller with his sea of oil, can be identified by the sought green resource that fuels their business: money. And in the 1800s, John Pierpont Morgan was the one who had the most authority over it. We must first go back to when America was an industrial powerhouse with a GDP of $21 trillion to comprehend the tremendous reach of Pierpont's influence. It's easy to lose sight of the fact that America was once a new attraction that wasn't too long ago highly dependent on British finance. Without any further ado, let's look at how J.P. Morgan became the most influential person in American finance history by a mixture of luck, brilliance, and contacts. Usually, we start somebody's personal history with birth, but it's impossible to tell J.P. Morgan's biography without discussing the powerful family who raised him. John Pierpont, Pierpont's grandpa, was a revolutionary and ferocious preacher. He introduced his grandson to the value of persuasive speaking, a talent that would eventually pay off for the eventual captain of industry. However, Pierpont's father, Junius Spencer Morgan, was a much more imposing and significant presence in his life. On April 17, 1837, John Pierpont Morgan was born into this affluent existence, receiving every benefit possible to prepare him for what was ahead. For the young Morgan, things weren't always peaches and rainbows though. He was a weak youngster. When he was a baby, he had convulsions, and as he got older, he frequently had respiratory infections, scarlet fever, and excruciating migraines. Because of his multiple medical issues, Pierpont had to be isolated, making him a loner. Pierpont could not play outdoors like most other children, so he remained inside and studied and learned to read banking statements. Pierpont found solace in the card game solitaire when he wasn't learning new things, which eventually evolved into one of his lifelong pastimes. Pierpont was a true leader when he was in the classroom. He would frequently argue with his professors and use reason to dissuade them from disciplining him. His insurmountable father, Junius, noticed Pierpont's leadership abilities as he progressed through school and decided to focus his efforts on encouraging Pierpont to develop his bright ability for the corporate world. After finishing his formal schooling, Morgan went to work for Duncan Sherman and Company's private company to study accounting. After graduating from accountancy school, Morgan spent 11 years working at his father's financial company. Morgan joined the Drexel Morgan and Company partnership in 1877 as one of the partners. The corporation was renamed J.P. Morgan and Company a few years after it was the most prominent bank in the world at the time. Analysts believe J.P. Morgan to be among the most remarkable individuals to have made financial decisions that supported the economies of the United States and the rest of the world. John Pierpont Morgan, just as every other American, was driven by success. Morgan had a childhood fantasy that one morning he would rule all of America, including its capital city of New York. The man credited with founding New York, Morgan spent his entire life working to realize his ideal of turning the city into a paradise. For Morgan, raising the city's level of excellence was a surefire method to show his power. Morgan contributed to the creation of the Hudson-Fulton Festival, whose accomplishment served as a defining moment for New York. Keeping this in mind, Morgan achieved his goal of ruling the finance sector through the Hudson-Fulton Committee. Morgan had established himself in the finance system before being asked to participate on the panel. His solid accounting education from Duncan, Sherman, and Company allowed him to do this. Morgan had a solid foundation in accounting thanks to Duncan, Sherman, and Company, but his familial experience had also impacted him. Morgan had it easy compared to his business partners because he was from an affluent family. Morgan is thought to have lived 76 years in tremendous affluence that was unmatched, even by today's standards. His dad, Junius Spencer, had already inherited land from his dad before he was even born, which he used to establish J.M. Beebe, Morgan and Company. Junius, a banker by trade, spent practically all of his spare time preparing his daughter to take up his sizable financial empire. Junius took his child to the top education in Germany and Switzerland to further polish him to accomplish this goal. Despite the several roles Morgan held within his father's businesses, It wasn't until 1871 when he joined up with Drexel to form Drexel, Morgan and Company, later renamed Morgan & Co., that his career started to take off. After joining forces, the two relocated the business to a building they'd purchased for around $1 million in the middle of New York. At the time, this cost was regarded as the highest for any piece of real estate a company could possess in any part of the world. The company survived many economic collapses that had brought down many other businesses thanks to Morgan's management style. This was demonstrated in the 1876 presidential race when his company contributed $5,000 to Rutherford B. Hayes' campaign. However, Morgan's motivations were entirely commercial, since he thought that if Hayes lost, inflation would rise, which would be bad for his companies. Furthermore, Morgan's ambition to rule the world of finance was evident from a young age. Only 2 years after working with Drexel, Morgan invested $1,400 million in federal bonds to support the American government's efforts to revive its industry, which the American Civil War had negatively impacted. The entire American organization's economic soundness resulted from this enormous investment. Morgan is thought to have supported entire government departments on several occasions, particularly during the Great Depression. Morgan never sought personal gain in his work. Instead, he looked for projects that would benefit the entire country and planet. Morgan used his clout to pave the way for the merger of Edison General Motors and Thomson House Electric to create General Electric, which became the only company in the world to produce electrical goods. Another notable union he oversaw was that of his Federal Steel Company and Carnegie Steel Company, which made the United States Steel Corporation the largest steel producer in the world. Even though J.P. Morgan made significant contributions in all of these areas, the banking industry is where he's best known for his work. In the 1800s, new banks were established all over America as the country expanded and diversified. According to research, these banks and J.P. Morgan Chase Bank are closely related. The Western Reserve Bank, the first bank to be established in Ohio, the Second Bank of Indiana, and Springfield Marine and House Insurance, founded in the Illinois city of Springfield in 1851, are three institutions that J.P. Morgan Chase Bank assisted in creating. Abraham Lincoln is renowned for being the bank's first client, depositing an amount of $310 in its account. J.P. Morgan utilized his political clout to guarantee that these banks received operation licenses when it was difficult for banks to obtain support. When J.P. Morgan sold financier William Vanderbilt's New York Central Railroad stock in 1879 without significantly affecting the stock value, he had a significant impact. The transaction, involving the most extensive stock ever sold in the late 19th century, was mainly successful, highlighting Morgan's prowess as a capital manager and supplier of securities. The Morgan firm had a long history of working directly with the railway sector. Overfilling and speeding wars were significant problems for American railroads at the time. Rather than concentrating on this circumstance, J.P. Morgan saw a chance to streamline a sector that he believed was essential to the future expansion of the American economy. Morgan started a project known as Organization, which resulted in a significant amount of industry reorganization. Morgan held direct influence over about 1/6 of America's railroad network by the moment he was approaching death. In the final decade of the 19th century, as the railway system was being completed, Morgan shifted his focus to financing significant industrial mergers such as those involving General Electric, U.S. Steel, and Universal Harvesters. At this point, J.P. Morgan & Co. had grown to be the most influential financial institution on the planet, and Morgan had earned the title of the most significant banker ever. This was because he gave himself the task of getting involved in every business disagreement and coming up with solutions for companies he didn't also own throughout economic crisis. When the gold reserves declined in 1894, John Pierpont Morgan is credited with starting a group by himself to keep the federal government on the standard. He significantly impacted the 1907 financial crash by using his connections to save the New York Stock Exchange, New York City, and several trust businesses. One of the most incredible people to ever live is regarded as John Pierpont Morgan. Morgan is thought to have managed several financial choices that prevented the world's trade from collapsing during his lifetime. He became even more well-known for his ability to save businesses that were not connected to him. His bank, J.P. Morgan Chase Bank, one of the largest in the world with operations in much more than 50 countries, makes his presence known even in contemporary society. Additionally, Morgan is recognized for completely revolutionizing the railroad sector and saving the federal government on multiple occasions. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you like this video.